Aside from the pandemic and the intolerable pressure on our hospital staff, and a shout out to them for all the great work they're doing, it's been a dark week in the history of our nation. We've always had an uneasy liaison with authority here. The Commission of Investigation report into mother and baby homes has exposed shameful secrets in troublesome detail, albeit long overdue. It feels like the lid has been lifted on a whole world of inconceivable hidden pain. Retrospective apologies been made by government and many religious orders, welcomed by some, not enough for others, and too late for most. Correctly, there have been calls for action and redress alongside legislation changes and cries for justice. It's a dark mystery as to what went wrong from what must have been well-intentioned beginnings of these mother and baby homes. Suffice to say that, as we all know, that unspeakable evil took place in secrecy, silence prevailed, and women and children were gravely mistreated, harms and large numbers lost without a trace. One of the many questions that has been asked is, how can such things be prevented from ever happening again? And at the heart of that question is another question: what does good leadership look like? It concerns me that a wholesome desire for morality, which I believe to be good for society, may inadvertently impose a burden of guilt on others that lead them to impossible places. It's also upsetting that judgmental attitudes or guilt-bearing glances can still cause great harm. On behalf of Christians everywhere, can I say sorry? As a man of the cloth, although I don't wear robes, but certainly a man who loves the scriptures, it grieves me that such evil could be done in the name of God, and that God could be misrepresented in such ways. I want you to hear, though, some of the surprising thoughts on the abuse of leadership from God himself, from the prophet Ezekiel. He sarcastically calls some of the leaders of God's people who have been corrupt in the shepherds of Israel. He had some choice words for these corrupt leaders who had been consumed by self-interest, negligence and abuse of power. They're strong words, but listen to these. He says, "Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves." Verse 3 and 4 of chapter 34 says, "You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally." Verse 17 and 19, he continues, he says, "As for you, my flock, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will judge between one sheep and another, between rams and goats. Is it not enough for you to feed on good pasture? Must you also trample the rest of your pasture with your feet? Is it not enough for you to drink clear water? Must you also muddy the rest with your feet? Must my flock feed on what you have trampled and drink what you have muddied with your feet?" And then verse 20 and 21, "See, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep, because you shoved the flank and shoulder, butting all the weak sheep with your horns until you have driven them away." Now, a couple of poignant observations I want to make from God's strong words. One is that nothing is hidden from God's all-seeing gaze. God knows all the cowardly men who disappeared. He knows those who remained silent when they should have spoken out. He noticed every instance of documented and undocumented abuse. He knows the state inspectors who turned a blind eye. He will call all leadership to account for their actions. This is not how leadership is meant to look, and one day all will stand before the judge of all the earth. Verse 11, the Lord Almighty says this, "I will myself search for my sheep and look after them." There's a great promise that echoes through the scriptures right up to John chapter 10 in the words of Jesus. Jesus declares himself as the good shepherd. And his example of leadership is one who lays down his life for the sheep. This is true leadership. This is what it's meant to look like. People who serve others by laying down their own life on the line. And Jesus has done that for us all. Perhaps you have questions for God, and rightly so. Ezekiel reminds us in all those words that God has seen all the cruel atrocities in our world, and he's not indifferent. But there are questions that I cannot answer for you. Why did God not stop and expose such wrongs sooner? It's a valid question. How could he allow such unspeakable evils go unanswered until now? And perhaps there are other questions you would like to ask God, and I would suggest you go ahead, you ask him, and he will listen. I guess God, being God, often refuses to intervene every time evil is about to happen. He's given us a measure of free will, but at some point of his determining, he will always say, enough is enough. And then finally, compassion flows from the Good Shepherd. The psalmist wonderfully affirms that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I don't know what many have felt during these horrendous scandals, but I can say that Jesus does. Jesus knows, because he knows what it feels like to cruelly suffer at the hands of his own people. In fact, he died unjustly. He knows how it feels to be betrayed by close friends. The imagery used of God as the Good Shepherd carries with it this sensitivity of the shepherd to all the aches, the losses, and the pains of the sheep. The Good Shepherd is attentive to their cries for justice and the vulnerability of the hurting. He knows and feels the uncomfortable search for identity, where no records were deemed important enough to be kept, and the consequent burden of distress. See, the Bible asserts that everyone is valuable because everyone is made in God's image. And one thing, all this pain, this mountain of pain, one thing it does is it signals that something is drastically wrong. See, such excruciating experiences bring tears, I believe, to the shepherd's eyes, and it causes compassion to flow from his warm heart, because we are valuable to him. We matter. You matter. And in this section in John 10, Jesus calls all the spiritual leaders of his day. He calls them hirelings or strangers, because he says when trouble comes, these leaders will abandon the sheep. Jesus, by contrast, is committed to his search and rescue mission. He lays down his life for his sheep. He calls other sheep to hear him too. There is something immensely personal about the way Jesus meets and encounters us. Perhaps you are weary. Perhaps you carry a world of pain on your shoulders. Call out to Jesus. Listen as he calls out to your name. He says, "Will you follow me? And I will lead you to green pastures and still waters, to places of nurture and healing." And the challenge is to ask the Shepherd King, ask Jesus to be the Shepherd King of your life today. With the Good Shepherd, I believe there are new beginnings. And the title of the series I'm doing is one about fresh starts. And as we look forward to a brave new post-COVID world, whenever that will be, let us be leaders. Let us encourage leaders to be those that follow the self-sacrificing example of Jesus in every nook and cranny of our community and society. Perhaps you're involved in leadership, but deep down you know you haven't met your own standards, let alone God's. Well, join the club. But with him there is forgiveness and transformation. Or perhaps such wrong has been done against you that you're filled with bitterness. And I would urge you to let Jesus soothe your soul and bandage your wounds. At the cross we find mercy for all. Perhaps even now the Good Shepherd may restore confidence in servant leadership and mend broken hearts to love again. I pray that you might find Jesus' words to be true when he says, "I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill and destroy. But Jesus says, I have come that you may have life and have it to the full." Let us pray that the Good Shepherd will lift Ireland and the world from the shame and the scars of its past, and instead lead us all to a life of abundance as we listen to his voice. Will you approach the Good Shepherd humbly for mercy and healing? I'm your host of Bundoran Bible Reflections, Matt Tuttleby. It's great to be with you today. God bless.